Now, as we know, in Sri Lanka, we have had a war which is over, but the conflict is not over. The conflict which created the war or resulted in the war is not over. But apart from that conflict, the ethnic conflict, we have other conflicts, and in as much as in other parts of the world, there are various forms of conflicts raging. So the traditional role of the media has now to address these developing situations, where in the old days, when we were younger and we were in the media, the basic thing was to report what happens or report events. But now the media does have a greater role, and I think it is not something we need to argue or urge. It is generally accepted. For which, to deal with these intricacies, which even political scientists and other conflict resolution experts find hard and grapple with, for media people, rushing to deadlines, rushing to meet editors' time frames, one does have to have a very great deal of skill and sensitivity to deal with these issues. So the professionalism of journalists is obviously very important. Only then they will be able to act with the speed and with the sensitivity that situations demand. Let me just touch on a few examples of situations where the media, when they are reporting, can contribute to unraveling things which may not fit into an ordinary reader, a layman's perception. The tendency for me to say reader, I tend to focus on the print media, but obviously this goes for all forms of media, and including social media, which is a thing of the day. In Sri Lanka, the Tamil community in particular has always been very sensitive, very concerned about colonization of the north and the east, of Sinhalese individuals, the majority community, coming and taking up residence there and creating demographic change. So, for many years I was quite puzzled. I used to wonder why. Now, there are Tamil people in the south who come and live among the Sinhalese and the Muslims. So, how come the Sinhalese people are the Sinhalese? How come they are not happy about Sinhalese coming there? Till a friend of mine took the trouble to sit down and explain. And I think that sort of clarification and explanation, if the media can provide to the public, it will help to de-escalate conflicts rather than escalate. Because the media has to be conscious all the time of trying to de-escalate and not escalate conflicts. My friend told me and explained, he said, there is no objection to Sinhalese people coming and living in the north. The only objection is when the state takes a central role in bringing and colonizing people there and trying, in their perception, to change demography or having the effect of changing demography, even if it was not the intention. So once this was explained to me, it became very clear what the objection was. Whether you agree with it or not, it helped to understand the situation. Now, the ordinary person, even today, when you read the papers, you see this question being raised. How come if the Sinhalese, the Tamils and the Muslims can live in the south with the Sinhalese, why can't the Sinhalese go and live there? So the whole question, it would be greater, it would be very helpful if the media can clarify this through interviewing people, through articles. Basically, the media has to create the platform for different views to be clarified. Then again, even in the recent elections, Sri Lankans who are here, I apologize to our foreign friends, but I'm just trying to give concrete examples which will help. There was one of the political parties which contested, the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, started raising the question of a Southeast unit. They said, we want a Southeast administrative unit in the eastern part of the country. Now, there was a big uproar among certain sections, and as a result, there was a lot of controversy. But actually, the situation was very simple. There has been earlier a demand for a Southeast political unit, which I myself disagree and don't accept. But what they raised this time at this election was a Southeast administrative unit, which would provide people the opportunity to transact business with the state or state agencies in the language they understand. Because in that Southeast administrative district, there is on one section Tamil speaking people, Muslims and Tamils, who have to come to the Sinhalese area and transact business in Sinhalese with the government agencies. So the demand, which I thought was quite legitimate, is to allow those people to transact business in the language they understand. So there was nothing really sinister, but even the proponents of that did not have the ability, or maybe they did not want to do to make it very clear that this was a very harmless, very reasonable request. Now again here, in this situation, if the media helped to clarify this for the benefit of all concerned, it would have helped to reduce conflict and not to create an environment of conflict. Now, the last example I want to give, and this is a dilemma which media I think is constantly faced with, is the case of the organization called the Bodu Bala Sena, and there were two other organizations who in the last 2 years have created anti-Muslim hype in the country with a lot of hate speech and so on and so forth, which has actually changed the environment and which created sort of an almost existential issue for the Muslims of this country. Now the question that I want to pose is, these guys used to have media conferences and public meetings, and they are only about 2.5 years old. What is the extent of publicity that the media should have given them? Of course, you have to draw the balance. You can't totally shut them out saying these guys are involved in hate speech, because you need to alert the people that there is a group doing this. But whether you do it in that extended form, when you give sort of a half sheet of a page for all the hate that they spew, is a question that media has to take, because unless the media also blows it up, people don't buy it. So there is a need to have a balance between reporting things that happen, but at the same time, in fact, helping by clarifying even some of the issues, because the media is well positioned to investigate, to find out a different version of the story, so that these things are balanced. So the role of the media in conflict resolution is obviously very complex, and if you take this to the international arena, you will find again same type of stories. Now, let me conclude with one small example, one last example. I remember in 2005, when President Mahinda Rajapaksa was contesting, I read in one of the papers, I think it was a foreign publication written by a Sri Lankan, where they described him as the hardline Mahinda Rajapaksa. So I argued with that person saying, your description of Mahinda Rajapaksa as a hardliner is not quite accurate. If you said that Mahinda Rajapaksa backed by hardline supporters or hardline groups, because there was various political groups who were hardline backing him, that would have been more accurate. Of course, the fact that he turned hardline later is another matter, but at that point of time, it would have been more accurate. Then the journalist told me, no, the thing is, we have to capture this in short phrases, but you can't do that at the expense of accuracy, because I think one of the most critical things that journalists have to do is to be accurate in whatever they write. And I think this is where I come back to the earlier point, that the increase in professionalism will help to contribute to the greater role that media is now obviously playing in domestic as well as international matters. May I now invite Mr. Kamal Siddiqui, who I'm sure will have a great deal to say, particularly coming from Pakistan, where there are many forms of conflict.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to talk about the role of media in conflict resolution. And I'm taking the Pakistani perspective on this. A lot of this has to do with how our media has behaved and how, given the opportunity, media can act for conflict resolution, and on other occasions it actually makes things worse. What I would do in this presentation is give three examples, three different situations of conflict, and try to explain the role the media played in those situations, and then also talk a bit on each one of them, mention the ethical issues involved, and some conclusions that I've drawn from these three situations. As you know, truth is the first casualty of war or of conflict, and we have seen this more in Pakistan, and this is the context in which I'm talking about conflict. And the other thing, of course, in terms of ethics is that there's always this discussion. Because I'm also part of the coalition of ethical journalism in Pakistan, whenever I talk about ethics to people, to journalists, to reporters, they say all that is well and good, but nobody can practice ethics on an empty stomach. The other argument that they make is that a good journalist is a journalist who is alive, not dead. So these are extreme situations in Pakistan. I start off by talking about the mentions I'll make of conflicts is, of course, our numerous wars with India, 48, 65, 71, 99. Then the situation in East Pakistan that led to the creation of Bangladesh. Post 2001, the war on terror, and also internal strife, which includes the situation in Balochistan province, and how the media has reported this and how the media has dealt with it in terms of ethics and overall in terms of conflict resolution. What we have to understand also is that Pakistani media, like Ranga mentioned earlier, is a very vibrant and free media. But this was not always the case. Between 1947, when Pakistan was created, and between 1947 and 2002, the state media controlled broadcast, which meant radio and television, while the print media was largely privately owned. A lot of people say that one of the reasons why the government let the print media be free was because of our very low literacy rate. In Pakistan, 1 in every 4 people can read and write. We have a literacy rate of between 25% and 30%. So because of that, our print media was given more leeway, and it was only after the broadcast media we had an explosion in 2002 in terms of number of news channels, and there was also a reason for that happening. Before that, there were no independent television news channels or radio stations. Till then, the source of information was radio, because if you wanted to know what was happening in Pakistan, one journalist would always say the best way to know what's happening in Pakistan is read the Indian media. You'll get to know what's happening in Pakistan. But in the mid 90s, what happened was, before Pakistan's private channels came into operation, we had the Star TV phenomena, whereby we had Indian news channels broadcasting into our homes. We would buy this huge dish and put it on the top of our roofs, and that was enough, because they were free to air. So we got to watch Indian entertainment. That's how we all got hooked to Star Plus, and that's why all of us know Ke Saas Kabhi Bahu Thi. But having said that, we also know that with Zee Television and Star News, we got a taste of Indian news channels. Just to put things into context, Pakistan's print media has not always been free. There have been times when it has been very strictly censored, especially when there's martial law in place. And even today, our print media faces pressures, which I will talk about a little later. Now, during conflict, I just mentioned to you the different conflict situations that Pakistan was in. Initially, when Pakistan was independent, the only source was Radio Pakistan and Pakistan Television. But post-East Pakistan, when the debacle, what happened, the crisis and the war, which led to the breakup of Pakistan, Pakistanis increasingly relied on foreign news radio, especially BBC Urdu service for their news. By the mid-90s, this was replaced by satellite television. And post-2001, we have the private news channels that are in place. Now, what actually happened in East Pakistan, because this is part of something that in Pakistan, a lot of people are still very clueless about what happened in East Pakistan. A picture I show you, this is one of the most, let's say, iconic pictures of Pakistani history. It shows a Pakistani general signing a treaty of surrender. He is surrendering to the Indian forces. Now, this picture was not used in Pakistan in most publications. In fact, what was happening in Pakistan was, even with the print media, which was very heavily censored, people were being told till the last minute that everything was okay. There was no conflict. And because it was state-owned media, television, I remember a teacher of mine told me that she was with Pakistan Television, and they used to make clips of people standing outside cinema halls and showing it as if that is East Pakistan, just to show that life was normal, while we know what was happening on the other side. So the media could not play a role in the conflict in East Pakistan in the way it should have. And people largely did not know in West Pakistan what was happening in the East and what the army was doing there and what was the conflict. People were very unaware about what was happening, and possibly that is why things went the way they did. In this, the role of the media was that Pakistan Television, Radio Pakistan reported all was well. Most newspapers were heavily censored, also reported all was well. And only news source was foreign radio stations like BBC. And public opinion was in favor of the military government that was waging that war in East Pakistan. Now, I want to contrast this with another situation that happened nearly 2 decades later. That was Kargil. Now, Kargil was a very different war for Pakistan, because unlike East Pakistan, in the case of Kargil, we had Zee News in our homes and we had Star News in our homes. So what was happening with Kargil was we were seeing that Zee News Pakistan Television was saying that there was no problem. Again, the same role it played. It said freedom fighters have gone into Kargil and are going to liberate that part of Kashmir. And the Pakistan Army or Pakistan Armed Forces have nothing to do with this. This was the initial stories that we were getting. But from the other side, from Zee Television and from Star News, we were getting images of Pakistani soldiers being shot and their identity cards being shown on television. And finally, the Pakistan Army started owning this war, because prior to this, they said there was nothing happening and everything was okay. So this was a very interesting part in our history where we could watch for a change We could watch both sides, independent news about what was happening in our country and in our neighboring country. And because of that, it helped create public opinion in Pakistan to the point that when our Prime Minister went to the US to try to press for some sort of resolution, there was no public backlash. People didn't come out on the streets because they understood the cost of the war, of the conflict. So that was a very positive role that was played by the media in conflict resolution at that time. But from that, our establishment learned some lessons. And one of the things that our president then, General Musharraf, takes credit for, because he took power soon after the Kargil crisis in 1999, he takes credit for opening up Pakistan's airwaves. But actually that's not what he did. The first thing he did was he banned Indian news channels from Pakistan. So you could no more watch news, Star News, or you could not watch Zee television, but you could still watch Indian entertainment. You could watch Star Plus, you could watch all sorts of entertainment, but news channels were banned. And to replace them, because there was an appetite for news, he allowed private TV channels, news channels to come. As Ranga mentioned, today we have more than 40 24-hour news channels in Pakistan. But at the same time, radio was largely restricted. There are some exceptions for entertainment. And another important measure that the government took was that it tried to do away with the satellite television dishes by introducing cable. Now, an investment for a satellite dish was over 10,000 rupees. A subscription for cable was 200 rupees. For everybody went for it. The only problem with that was that then the government started to control what would go. Whenever there was something that the government didn't want, they would just tell the cable operator to shut it down. And they did this when Musharraf imposed emergency. 8 years later, they did exactly this. They shut off channels that were critical of the government. They also set up the PEMRA, the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority. So suddenly we were back to square one. And this is where we stand today, where Pakistani media has again been stopped from within. It's not allowed to go beyond certain boundaries. Now this continues today, 1999, 2001 onwards, where now we have restrictions on the media in the form of licensing, and also this is where the ethical issue comes in. First of all, the media can't seek the truth and report it. The other is, of course, that advertising has become a very big lever. Vipul also talked about this. He talked about Monsanto. We have a number of companies, and one of the issues that Vipul raised was that at least some people can write and print. There are some entities in Pakistan whose stories nobody can write. No print newspaper will publish them because of the repercussions. So there is advertising censorship, and there's also self-censorship, because the government has also, in many ways, left the media to write what they want, but at the same time now the media is self-censoring, because they know that if they write something that goes against someone, they can be attacked. We have seen that happen even with our news organization. We have had our offices attacked. We've had 3 of our staffers killed last year because we apparently were too critical of certain militant organizations. Also, the other thing that's happened, which I think is a great tragedy in terms of reporting, is that reporters or journalists are not allowed to go into conflict areas, and they're actively discouraged from doing that. So that also stops us from getting the news. We have situations where right now we're conducting a military operation in the tribal areas, but there's no single journalist there independently reporting. The journalists, most of them have either fled or they're scared because of threats from both sides, that much of the news that's coming out is filtered and conditioned and in many ways is doctored. So we don't know what's happening actually in our military operation. The same is true of the province of Balochistan. Journalists are not allowed to go there. They are actively discouraged, and in many instances we have seen that in Pakistan since 2001 over 90 journalists have died in the line of duty, including 14 in 2010 and 6 in 2013. Of these, 68 were killed, and while others died in bombings and suicide attacks. Now, this is in addition to the threats and the intimidation that journalists face in Pakistan. So, the casualty average of one journalist every 50 days for the past 12 years and one journalist every 30 days in the last 6 years suggests that journalists are now easily targeted, the government has withdrawn, and this, of course, is affecting conflict resolution in terms of the role of the media, because the media is not willing to take that role anymore. There are very disturbing figures about this thing. So what's happening now is the reporting has become one-sided. You report what people want you to report in Pakistan. So the concept of conflict resolution by the media, with the help of the media, is no more there. In fact, because of continuous state intervention, censorship, pressures, harassment, at the same time there are attacks on journalists. And there are also divisions in the media. The media is not united. There are groups within the media. One is supporting one side of the government, another is supporting the other. This comes back to the issue of ethics, because it also has to do with advertising revenue. Government advertising revenue is given to those that support the government, and others that are against the government are also possibly doing it because they're not getting revenue and no other reason. And of course, there are restrictions on the movement of journalists now in place. So a lot of places have become out of bounds for journalists in Pakistan. Given the situation, in my conclusion, I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is that for conflict resolution, the media should show both sides of story and report accurately. That's not happening in Pakistan. Very one-sided, and you can't blame the journalists because they are being attacked. And by not doing that, the media is actually worsening the situation. Because we're not telling the whole story like that had happened in East Pakistan, what we're doing is that we're misinforming our people, so things are going from bad to worse. That's about, in terms of, we have people who say that the days of PTV were the good old days when everything was fine, nobody reported things that were bad, and today there's a lot of sensationalism in reporting. But having said that, I think the media is attempting to play a role in terms of informing, but it is not able to do for the reasons that I told you. The one thing that, the one sentence that really, like in some ways moves me is, one day a cameraman got up and we were conducting a workshop, and he said to me that, do you realize that when we go out into conflict zones, the camera is insured, but I am not. So this is the state of media in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamal Siddiqui, for that insight into the situation in Pakistan, where with regard to the media. May now call upon Dr. Manisha Vanasinghe Paskal.
As a non-journalist in a room full of journalists, and there's a lot of issues at stake, because I've been told to speak on conflict resolution and media. I've taken some ideas, and they're similar to Mr. Yusuf's and Mr. Siddiqui's, but I've also kind of looked at it from a different angle. For example, let's take one of the worst cases of media and conflict, the case of Rwanda in 1994, when the Kanguru newspaper, as well as the radio, television, the Mills Collins, exploited the power that they had as the single speaker of the country, because the other voices were not heard. The journalists were ousted or they were silent, and they helped perpetrate or incite a genocide which killed 800,000 people in 100 days. And of course, one journalist, Mr. Rogigiu, so pronouncing it is wrong today, was given 12 years sentence for inciting a conflict, a genocide. Now I'm trying to find the other way. How do journalists, whether in times of war through war journalism, or in times of peace through peace journalism, or just ordinary way, how do individuals ensure and use the media for resolving conflict? that is resolution. Now, a small comment here. Conflict, it isn't always about once it escalates, we should de-escalate and not prevent it from escalating any further. You have to also see if you can prevent conflict. There is a new area called conflict prevention. So how do you do that? Can you use the media in its all these pervasive forms and its continuous, consistent forms that are available now? It's no longer once in a while going to morning looking at the newspaper, or once a day looking at the television. Media is pervasive. It's everywhere. And you have traditional media and you have social media, and both of them are unbelievably present in everyday life. I check the CNN, BBC, other there and anything and everything as I go to work, and then I once in a while check on that, see if something new has happened. And of course, as I was telling one of my fellow participants here, sometimes and most often not, it's sensationalized. Even the mundane is sensationalized, because that's how you grab the attention of the reader. But media is important. And in war journalism, you have embedded journalism, you have censored journalism. But in Vietnam War, you saw 600 journalists being allowed access to where they could and where they wanted to. You had a place where there was sensationalization also, but also presenting a different light, shining a light to where where it isn't always shown. And that resulted in anti-war movement in America. So there's opportunities and chances for journalism. But what do I mean by media and conflict resolution? In the past, traditionally, we had, as an activist as well as a conflict analyst myself, we had one track, and that is state to state, diplomats doing the mediation, resolution. But after, say, the 1990s, you have multi-track diplomacy where there is a core role for media. Media has a role. They are one of the multi-tracks. There are 9 tracks, and one of them is the media. Business, civil society, other entities are also involved in this multi-track diplomacy idea. But the idea is that journalists and professional as well as amateur have a task to play. They have a task to play prior to, during, and even at the de-escalation state of a conflict. And it doesn't have to be Sri Lankan war level. It can be interpersonal level. It can be intergroup level, as in ethnic groups or religious groups. But there is a place for media. And one of them is, of course, the ethical presentation of the conflict, advocacy-based ideas, that is more linked to peace journalism, but also to highlight certain things before they become extreme. Highlight human rights violations where the focus is currently on this aspect, A, B, and C, but you show these aspects that are emergent conflicts, and maybe nip it in the bud. Highlight it, give them a voice, give them a presence, and then the media can do that. It doesn't have to be always today's what is happening today and highlight on that and then forget about what had happened in the past 10 days ago and what is going to happen. You should be able to project also, you should be able to think of the past as well. And like I said, traditional media, and then you have social media. Everybody can tape something, upload it to YouTube or some other format, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people can view it. So why not use this mechanism? Why not use it to prevent, to highlight, and de-escalate. Now, I use certain terminologies, but basically it just means that before others know that there's a problem between ethnic groups or between religious groups, as a journalist, as someone who's amongst the grassroots, be talking to people, you get an inkling that there is tension. If you are with your sources, they tell you things. Use that opportunity, highlight it. That's a prevention mechanism. But explore these issues. Find the facts. That's a bit difficult sometimes. And always continue to keep in touch with the grassroots. But more than that, at the de-escalation stage, there is a lot to do with ethical reporting. There has to be certain self-censorship, especially at a large scale. I'm sorry to say that in a room of journalists, that there is this notion that sometimes it is difficult to present everything, even all the facts that you have, just in case there are spoilers ready to destabilize the situation. And the censorship component, yes, you need censorship when it comes to, say, if there is a peace being brokered and it is being quietly brokered, but if there is, for example, the 1979 hostage crisis in Iran, American hostage crisis, because of the relentless pressure of the media, the secret dealings could not be handled correctly. However, certain things are kept secret for a purpose. So there is self-censorship there, but more than self-censorship for journalists is the notion of ethics and ethical reporting. Now, what I've tried to do is kind of look at what the journalists themselves as professionals, but also realize that everybody with a camera, with a cell phone, can and do become amateur journalists. You see certain events and it's only presented through an amateur's photography. That means they are also people, and they also impact a person's perception. And I've been reading quite a lot on this conflict journalism, conflict resolution, and media, and asking people, ordinary people, to go on and meet someone from another ethnic group, another religious group, another sect, another tribe, someone they have not had interactions with. Journal that, present that, tape some of those interactions, and then present it at a forum to show how interactions change your perception. Those things are very powerful, because usually what happens is when there is an intense conflict or when there is conflicts, we only read our journal, the side we want to check. There was a time when one household only took Daily News and Observer. There was another house would only take Times and Leader and maybe Island. Just like that, in every country, you have two different lenses, and they just enhance and they give you what you want to know. They don't give you what one of my teachers used to say, they don't give you the de-pancaked version of the problem. Pancake, flat, no tension, nothing, everything is nice and smooth, and that's the truth. De-panking means a layered cake. There's substance there, there's mystery there. There's some things you don't understand, and that is not presented. So when you use amateur journalists or journalists and go to see something and present from the other side, that is peace journalism, that is conflict resolution journalism, and media used in conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
May I now call upon our last speaker, Mr. Eric Sinje.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf. As I was coming to the podium, I looked around the room and I saw a few heads nodding. So I decided I was going to talk about a different kind of conflict. I would just throw my paper away, talk about a different kind of conflict. And it's the conflict, because I hope this will wake you up. It's the conflict that takes place every day between the carpet and the floor. And I'm going to put my 1,000 rupees up for anybody who tells me how that conflict is resolved on a permanent basis. The carpet and the floor. Anyone? Absolutely no one? And I'm just looking around the room and everybody's awake, so I'm glad. I didn't intend to lose it. But the fact is, the carpet constantly reminds the floor, don't move, I have you covered. See? So there's peace and we can walk on the carpet. On conflict resolution and the role that the media plays, I decided I'll take a step back and, based on my own experience in Africa, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, completely revisit that question and look at whether or not media has a role in conflict resolution, and based on that experience, whether media plays that role or can play that role. My point of departure, as I've thought about this, is to wonder what the purpose of media is. Understanding the purpose of media, if media professionals understood the purpose of media, if media consumers understood the purpose of media, I believe that the practice of media would be different. And I believe the nature of the industry will be different. So understanding purpose, especially by media professionals, is critical to what they do, how they perform their duties, and where they position themselves on issues. Professor Christians talked about the pre-theoretical commitment. The question is, what is that pre-theoretical commitment on the part of the media professional? What is it? If you question that, if you can identify that, if you can understand that, you will understand what motivates that journalist, what drives actions by that media professional. And ultimately, where media in any given social environment stands vis-a-vis the challenges of that social context. That's why it's important. Not, someone says you have to think about what it is you're thinking about to understand what it is you're thinking. We've got to be able to do that, to finally get to assessing the role that media plays in conflict resolution as in other issues. The media in Africa today, I grew up as a media professional, been in it for many years. And in journalism school, we were told, you are the watchdog of society. Sure, lots of you were told that. So for me, as for many other professionals, that role of watchdog became primordial. And who were we watching against? Essentially the government. Hold governments to account, we were told. We were the watchdog. We were those who had to protect public property. We had to watch against actions by those potential thieves. And that became our role. We failed to grasp the larger context in which we operated, the larger challenges of society, the greater mission of every citizen and of those instruments, those of media, which is the most important transformational instrument at the disposal of any and every society. We did not learn to use that instrument for the greater good, except, of course, that passive role of watching against abuse of power, which is important. And that purpose has defined how every single journalist on the continent of Africa continues to operate to this day. And I dare say, virtually every journalist in the developing world. You are the watchdogs. And because your purpose is so narrowly defined, you've tended not to think outside the box. We have not seen our role in the deeper causes of conflict. Kumar was telling me yesterday about Boko Haram in Nigeria. And he gave me the genesis of that crisis because he lived it. And in all of my years of dealing with Boko Haram, which is actually present in my own country, Cameroon, we're next to Nigeria in the north, I had never understood where that crisis came from. And it took my coming to Colombo, talking to a senior journalist from Pakistan, for me as a Cameroonian affected by this crisis to even begin to understand it. How do I, as a media professional, pretend to mediate that kind of conflict? And precisely because it was never, for most of those journalists, it's not why they are journalists. I'll give two examples of current crisis on the continent. There's one in a country called South Sudan, which is the youngest country in the world, literally, because it got its independence 2 years ago. And that conflict, which I happen to know well because prior to taking my current job 6 months ago, I was advising the president of that country. That conflict has been defined as an inter-ethnic conflict, in spite of everything that stands in the face of that. It's spite of all the arguments that are visible to anybody who even cares to take a quick look. That on the government side, it's a hodgepodge of tribes. On the rebel side is the same. But because every movement has to have a leader, the leader in one group tends to be from one ethnic group, and the leader on the other side tends to be from another ethnic group. All of a sudden, that whole conflict has been reduced into sound bites and described as an inter-ethnic conflict. And what has that done? It has reinforced ethnicity as the problem. And we can be searching until the chickens come home to roost. We will not find a solution to that conflict, as long as it is seen as an inter-ethnic conflict. And the media is playing that role. CNN needed to reduce it to something it can feed to American audiences. The BBC, similarly. So the dominant media defined that conflict. And for reasons that I think I've explained, because the African media does not see itself as a player beyond this watchdog passive role, they're just spewing out the same trash that's coming out from somewhere else. The total misunderstanding of that conflict. It's another conflict, current conflict on the continent. It's in a country called the Central African Republic. Quite really, literally, at the center of Africa. And here, again, it's described as an inter-religious conflict. It's the Muslims versus the Christians. And again, that was, that conflict was defined by international non-governmental organizations, international NGOs. And it was easy for them to do that and appeal for more support for their work from a world that has come to see the world in terms of these two religions. And that has been fed to the media. And once again, that's what we're being told. And nobody's looking at, again, the deeper issues. The developmental issues, the sociological issues, the political issues, all of what led to this crisis. So I believe firmly that media does have a role in conflict resolution, but it's not a role, that role will be played when we look beyond the facade, when we look deeper into our purpose. That we are that powerful instrument of transformational change that society isn't really using. That media professionals, unfortunately, are not holding up. And I think we'll get there when we start having a healthier debate about the role of media, not only in conflict resolution, but in the overall attempt to contribute to healthier societies around the world. I believe we will get there when we perceive of the role of media as a moderator of the social conversations that should be taking place every day in our countries. And we, the media, those of us in the media, become the arbiters, the moderators of those conversations, social, political, and otherwise. I believe we will get there when we deepen the quality of training in our schools of communications. And finally, I believe we will get there if we entrench ethics. If we can get journalists across the universe to look at the two sides of every story, to seek the deeper truths, to tell the untold stories, to give voice, as we keep saying in what has become something of a slogan, to give voice to the voiceless, to hear all sides of the stories. That's when we will get there. That's when we will play that role of, being important players in what is so needed in the world today to resolve conflict. Thank you.
If anybody wishes to ask a question or clarification or even a brief comment, now is the time.
I will have my fair share of talking today, but I'm just kind of curious about a number of things. Where can we draw the line in terms of pursuing the truth and being a propaganda in terms of speaking for the government? Because the concept of peace journalism actually troubling me. I've got a friend in Australia who actually finished his thesis in peace journalism. And every time we meet, we have an argument over his thesis. Because I strongly believe, and probably people who have gone through a university, we are told to actually tell the truth. And there are professional ethical standard things that you have to actually uphold as a journalist. To be objective, fair, balanced, without malice. And when I listen to this concept or this notion of peace journalism, journalist has a role to play in conflict resolution, it's kind of put me in a very awkward position, because if I know the truth, then what am I going to do as a journalist? To tell the truth, or to actually work some external notion about my role is to actually advocate peace, which to me, it's conflict of interest. I'm not really sure where to draw the line, honestly.
Okay, Duran, I do not think the truth is yours to tell as a journalist. Otherwise, whose truth are you telling? Yours? I think as a journalist, I use the term moderating conversations. You give every possible side to the argument. It is in that you may, if you're lucky, find the truth. So this religious pursuit of truth can be deceitful. And even when we say we should have a role in conflict resolution, why is that? Because conflict should be avoided at all costs. We can at least agree on that. Conflict should be avoided at all costs. Conflict destroys our human society. So I think these two things should be very clear in our minds. Media has a role in conflict resolution because conflict is anathema to the human existence. But the truth is not the media's to tell. The media should help society find its truths.
I just wanted to add a bit to it. One of the ethics is seek the truth and report it. That is, like you said, that's what we are taught. But the more important part of your question, which I felt, was where do you draw the line? And our job is to take information and report it. We're not supposed to judge, or ideally we should not even withhold parts of it. We should report it as it is. But in my instance, I draw the line and you use the word truth and then you said propaganda, where it becomes propaganda. So, for example, if the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, issues a statement in which they make some claims or they make a threat, I would think twice before taking it, because for me that is propaganda. And I don't want to be used as an agent for propaganda or something that is in some ways propagating terrorism or furthering their agenda. That is where I, as an editor, would draw the line. Although I can also say to you that I think this is a situation that was faced by journalists in Sri Lanka as well, where militant organizations would threaten journalists and say that if you don't publish happens in Pakistan, that if you don't publish this, we will then take care of you. So it's a very difficult question you've asked, and there's no right or wrong answer to it.